Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Transportation and Environment Committee. It is Thursday, March 30th, and we are about to start a work session on Bill 1123, my legislation to enact road improvements throughout the county so that we can continue meeting our Vision Zero goals and making our streets safer for pedestrians, bicyclists, drivers, and everybody. And I appreciate the support of my colleagues in this work. And there are a lot of details to work through, not only within the Department of Transportation, but within the region and with the state as well, as we recognize that a lot of our roadways are where incidents occur are state highways. And so want everyone to understand that when this legislation was drafted, we drafted it with that legal understanding at the forefront of our minds, that if we could, we would have a much more expansive bill that would cover more roads and facilitate analyses of pretty much every incident, recognizing that last year alone there were 541 pedestrians and bicyclists who were hit and 19 individuals who were tragically killed, and those are pedestrians and bicyclists. The number of others who were injured on our roads who were in cars surpasses that number. But this is legislation aimed at making our roads safer for pedestrians and bicyclists. And I just want to thank the members of the community who came out to testify, sharing their personal tragedies, invoking the names of their loved ones, for whom we are doing this work to prevent future loved ones from being killed on our roads. And so with that, I don't know if colleagues have anything. Yeah, Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. I just had want to thank everyone for being here today, and request of the chair that before we dig into the packet, if appropriate, if we could have just take a few moments to talk about our Safe Routes to School programs, the school zones, just to have a grounding so that we're all talking about the same thing
Sure.
as we dig into this, and that people watching at home also understand when we're talking about school zones and safe routes to schools and other things, what that actually encompasses, I think would be helpful.
So those are the complications,
Okay.
right, that I alluded to, and the way I think we should proceed, recognizing there's lots of nuance and lots of information and points of clarification to share, is that this legislation essentially has 4 different action items. Let's work through them, and then when we get to the school section, okay, we can dive deeper into the issues that you just talked about.
Sure.
That work?
Yep, absolutely.
Councilmember Malcolm, she's good too. Okay, Ms. McCartney Green, thank you for your work on this, and if you want to lead us through the packet.
Thank you, Chair Glass, and good afternoon, council members. Bill 1123 was introduced February 28, 2023, and had a public hearing on March 21st at 1:30. As the chair mentioned, we've received several testimonies in support of the bill, and along with the testimonies were a few recommended or suggested amendments as well. So preparing the packet, council staff took in consideration public testimony, but also from the executive branch, DOT testified in support and also had recommendations, and the planning board as well. And so with that, I try to identify the issues but also couple them together. I do think it's a great approach to talk about the provisions broadly and then to go through each specific amendment to make sure the committee is agreeable to that. With that said, I'm happy to dive in. I also do want to mention that for the impact statements that we did receive, the climate impact statement anticipates that the bill could have a positive impact on the contributions to addressing climate change. The economic impact statement addresses that it would have an overall positive impact on the economic conditions in the county, and expects the bill to induce pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure development in certain downtown and town center areas. Fiscal impact statement has not been received and is still pending. We did have a request for that, and so hopefully that will be prepared if this bill moves on from the committee for final action for further review. Racial impact statement was received, and that's an addendum to the packet, and that was found as indeterminative, just because it wasn't clear what specific residents would be affected by the implementation of this bill.
And Ms. McCartney-Green, if I could just jump in there. I don't usually make it a habit of questioning the impact statements that are made, but with respect to the racial equity and social justice impact statement, it is a fact that our communities of color are disproportionately affected by deaths and incidents on our roadways. And so looking at it through that lens, any legislation that makes it safer for pedestrians and bicyclists will make it safer for our communities of color.
Thank you. Okay, so turning to page 4 of your packet, looking at number 1, I also just do want to mention that Councilmember Friedson also has an amendment, and let the chair take a look at that and also where that may fit in. But looking at number 1, the question is, should the committee expand and clarify the scope of the traffic infrastructure review? And specifically talking about the applicability to whether or not removing the terminology student and actually applying it to pedestrian on a whole within a school zone or within a specific time frame. And so as introduced, the bill refers to that the infrastructure review would occur within a school zone for a collision that involves a student traveling to and from school. As mentioned, the council received several public testimonies, including from the planning board, to expand that scope where it's not just a student, it can be anyone that's walking to and from in that area. And so looking at page 5 of the packet, there's an amendment that amends lines 12 to 19. That amendment takes into several things. 1, the pedestrian, removing the word student and including the word pedestrian. And 2, Councilmember Friedson also had support to expand the word to pedestrians, and I also believe that the executive branch. Do you want to stop there just for discussion before we?
Yes, let's stop there because now we've entered into the school zone.
Yes.
And there are a lot of questions therein to Councilmember Stewart's point earlier. So let's take that step back, and whether it's Director Conklin or anybody else who's joining us, could we talk about how we typically treat incidents that are in school zones? What is the Department of Transportation's role? What is MCPS's when those things happen on state highways? How is the state involved? And then, of course, MCPD as well. And Director Conklin,
I'll get us started. There are a couple components to this. First of all, the Vision Zero program has a proactive element to it, where there's a Safe Routes to School infrastructure review that's been funded, and the funding has been increased in recent cycles by the County Council, where we are proactively looking at every school in the county. We have done maybe 25 to 30% of those schools so far in the last couple of years. And we look at all of the conditions, whether there's the sidewalk present, whether there are traffic control adjustments needed, and make those improvements after those reviews are complete. So independent of there being collisions with pedestrians, that work is occurring to try to identify things that need to be adjusted. When there are collisions at the schools, if it's a serious or fatal collision, that is reviewed in much the manner that this bill is calling for. So the MCDOT will look at the circumstances of that collision and identify whether there was anything related to the traffic controls or infrastructure that was a contributing factor in that. Oftentimes there isn't anything specific about the infrastructure condition. It's situational, whether there was obstruction of somebody's line of sight, whether there was elements related to the movement of people where somebody didn't see something, or there could be other elements related to a vehicle problem, a condition of the vehicle issue, or there could be behavioral causes of these collisions. If there was a situational would be medical, but if there were behavioral elements like impairment or excessive speed or distraction, those would be behavioral elements that might have caused the collision. So if there's an infrastructure issue identified, then remedial actions are discussed and a plan of action is undertaken for that. So one example of that series of circumstances was Montrose Road, where there was a serious collision of a student trying to access a school bus. There's not by code a deficiency with the infrastructure, but the Department of Transportation looked at this and said we could have more protective equipment, more crosswalk protection here, and then those are moved forward into the various capital programs that would support that. So that's kind of the long and short of how that Safe Routes to Schools program works and the review of collisions that are serious or fatal. And again, the Vision Zero program has been focused on serious and fatal collisions, and we have plenty of scope of remedial work to do in areas where we know we have those collisions. So we have not looked at the full range of collisions, which is what the bill that you've drafted calls for, involving pedestrians. If there's no serious injury, then it typically is not reviewed currently.
Sure. Thank you for that, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Holland. You know, I'm curious from your perspective. You know, this is Montgomery County is a large government, and we do have different agencies like MCPS, which is outside of the executive branch. And I'm curious from your perspective, trying to coordinate all these activities. How do you see the coordination of these safety measures across the county in full?
Well, good afternoon, Matt. For the record, Wade Holland, Vision Zero Coordinator with the County Executive's Office. And Michael, you're probably best to answer this. But in general, I mean, if there's a crash, we're alerted to it. You know, if it's on school property, if it's on DOT property, even on private property, you know, people want to solve the issue if there is an issue. So if we want to reach out to this principal, we know we have good relationships with the various principals across all 210 Montgomery County schools. If we need to go to the superintendent's office, speak with them as well. That's the kind of different roles we would take on, especially if it's directly on school property related to the parent loop, the bus loop, or somewhere else on the property. You know, as MCPD puts the crash together, the information, we can share that information with the school and see if there's any remediation that needs to be taken. I don't know if Michael, you have anything to add to that?
Good afternoon, everyone. Michael Paylor, Chief of Traffic Engineering and Operations, Montgomery County DOT. Good to see you, Chair Glass, Councilmember Stewart, Councilmember Balcone. To amplify some of the things that Wade is talking about and talking about the overall coordination that takes place, Montgomery County DOT usually is working in concert with MCPS, with MCPD, Police Department, with the Maryland State Highway Administration when that's appropriate, depending on where these crashes occur. And that coordination structure typically takes place in accordance with an announcement either from MCPD that a crash has occurred. Oftentimes, and perhaps to amplify something that Director Conklin said, sometimes we do receive information from citizens or residents from the school itself to ask us to identify or investigate an incident that occurs proximal to the school or somewhere in that area. And we do that, and maybe there are traffic engineering solutions that we believe are applicable, and we seek to implement those as quickly as possible. So those are the type of coordinative structures that we navigate in partnership with the three entities or the four entities that I mentioned. We typically look at generating solutions from that.
And let me just take it a level deeper. When there is an incident and it is shared internally and with the public, what are the conversations about next steps? What are the conversations about remedies?
Yeah, thank you so very much. First of all, following the evaluation or investigation of the location in the crash from MCDOT's perspective, if there are infrastructure modifications that need to be made, whether they are whether they're directly involved with the crash or not, we typically coordinate with either the inquirer and other appropriate agencies or entities that are involved and let them know what particular modifications we intend to make. And we usually make those modifications using our level of effort CIP projects or programs, depending on what they are.
And what happens when those areas are not county-controlled roads?
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. We typically will reach out to MDOT-SHA, Department of Transportation State Highway Administration, and let them know if we have been asked to. So let me back up. So there are a couple of ways that we do this. Typically, if an event occurs on a state highway, we are typically notified of that too. So we know that they know, and we usually don't take any action. There are some special cases. For instance, there was a crash, I cannot remember the road, but it involved a Montgomery County ride-on bus. And even though that crash occurred on a county roadway, on a state roadway, we took it upon ourselves to do an investigation of the fatality that occurred. And all of the recommendations that came out of that, we forwarded that to M.SHA and said, hey, we've conducted this investigation. These are the results of the investigation. Here are the improvements that we're recommending, and we suggest that you implement these as soon as appropriate. And we typically allow them to handle that through their own processes and chains of command to determine whether or not they agree or disagree with our findings.
Colleagues?
Sorry. So when you're working with the state, so you're looking at the fatalities and serious collisions. You wouldn't look at all the school zones in looking at the state roads.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Can you just define, just for folks who are, how do you define a school zone? And does it change school to school?
So in general, a school zone is defined as a certain distance or radius that surrounds a school, and it identifies roadways that are adjacent to the school. I believe the threshold is a half mile, but the roadways that are that have to be abutting the particular school property to qualify for that. So that's the general definition. So about half a mile or so around the school.
So for each of our 210 schools, each of them have an identifiable school zone. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
So picking up, I was going to ask the legal question. There we go. Thank you.
In your bill text, the definition under County Code 319A, lines 8 to 10, defines a school zone as within a half-mile radius of any school established by the State Highway Administration or the county pursuant to the Maryland Transportation Code. So that's the clarity for county law of what's that's defined, but it is relying on what the state has also defined.
I wanted to add one clarifying element about the jurisdictional responsibilities. A number of our schools are in incorporated municipalities that maintain their own roads. And in those instances, that jurisdiction would be the one who would follow up on these fatal or serious collisions that occur near schools. We don't generally have any role when it's in Rockville, Gaithersburg, Tacoma Park, or some of the smaller municipalities.
Important distinction, right? We talk about this a lot, and most recently talked about this on Tuesday with housing, right? And most of these, if not all of these pieces of legislation are for county-owned roads, not the municipal-owned roads, right? So for the purpose of this conversation, school zone is half a mile radius. Okay. And so, do you have anything?
When we're going to start working through
Yep, so we're still on the first item, and first on school. So Ms. McCartney-Green, you want to keep us going?
Yeah, so just wanted to clarify that the committee was open to expanding the scope to pedestrian as opposed to just the student in the...
Yep. So thank you. When I look at this, I look at, who, when, and where. And so I have comments on all of those, if we could just do that, right? So for me, if the focus of this bill is to look at the safety of the infrastructure, I think we have to look at any collision that occurs in this school zone in terms of the first piece of the infrastructure review. And I understand the dilemma of state road versus county road and versus municipality, which I hadn't even considered. But I do think that I would look at it as any individual, any time, and anywhere in the school zone. And I just want to mention the state road issue. So many of our schools are on state roads. I live across the street from Northwest High School, and shortly after Northwest was opened, we had a fatal collision of a child on Great Seneca Highway. And even though The principal at the time really wanted fencing. The principal didn't have any power in getting that fencing put up. After the accident, after the collision, the fence was put up. The fence has been there for 20 years now. I think that we have to look at state roads. And because we have pressure or some level of incentive, I don't want to say pressure, but we do have an opportunity to correct these this infrastructure, and especially, I mean, our high schools. I have 4 high schools in my area. 3 of them are on state roads. So I would like to open that up.
Yeah, and so I clearly want to hear from colleagues, and as I tried to do at the beginning of this conversation, frame where I was coming from in drafting it, recognizing there's a lot that we need to do. But I think that starting with a piece of legislation and a bunch of directives that would overwhelm the system, I tried to minimize that. And so I tried to be very targeted in how we moved forward to make the most impact and provide the most safeguards, recognizing that an overwhelming majority, nearly 64 and 74% of pedestrians and bicyclists have their incidents occur at intersections. So we targeted intersections. And here, my heart drops every time I get an alert that a student has been hit. And so we looked at students. I absolutely agree we need to make those areas in every area. And so if the thought process is because we're already looking at it for students, then we expand that definition to everybody in that zone. I think that makes sense, and the resources are already being applied to that area.
I don't think there's any objection to expanding from students to people. I think that's a completely rational way to look at it. I don't suspect you automatically know whether the person involved is a student. You may, but you may not. So I don't think there's any argument with that. We have, when reviewing the bill, had some additional conversation about the state roads component of this. One of the notions that we came up with is being the point of contact for the reports from the police and determining which agency is truly responsible for any follow-up or infrastructure improvement, and keeping a very consistent record of those crashes that are on state roads, making sure that the referrals of those issues happen to the State Department of Transportation, and following up with the State Department of Transportation to see what recommendations they may have as a result of that, rather than us prescribing to them what we think they should do, which they often don't appreciate that input to a great degree, and repeat whatever work we have done with their own forces. So we thought that might be a way to kind of make sure that we're being accountable for those collisions. If there are issues related to county responsibility on those state roads, and there can be, if there's a sidewalk maintenance issue, that could be a county responsibility. If there's a traffic signal maintenance or functioning issue, that could be a county responsibility. But if it's about the design of the facility, that's a state responsibility, and we would look to see what county obligations or responsibilities there were there, and then refer these actions to the state for them to follow up and track the performance on that follow-up. That had been an idea that had come up in our discussion internally about how to manage the state issue, and that might be a solution that the committee might feel covers this ground effectively for the first round of this legislation.
Yeah, and that was really built off what we've built in the last couple of years in terms of our fatal crash responses. So we have the collision reconstruction unit that does all the crashes except for those on the interstates and the ICC, but a lot of those are all on state roads, as was mentioned earlier. So what we have is a kind of a rapid response system where, usually within 24 hours of that fatal crash, the collision reconstruction unit is notifying DOT and SHA of that fatal, so they can take those actions to the appropriate roadway owner can take action on those roadways. So that's what we kind of model this on, was that model of sharing information and making sure it gets to the person who actually can control and make the change there.
Sorry, Wade, we would use that same procedure with municipalities.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, from the first responders' perspective, 911 call is made, and then what happens next?
it doesn't matter where that accident is occurring, we're gonna treat it the same. It just would be the notification process, obviously. Just for clarification, I absolutely would support extending this beyond students and just pedestrians in general. That makes sense. What I do on a clarifying answer to a question would be, are you, because you say any time, and I think if we expand that any time and there's a review process for every single one of these, it is going to be something that may not be manageable in terms of numbers. And so I just don't want to set us up for failure. It's one thing within the school time. When we expand it to any time, and I think Mr. Holland did the numbers, I mean, we're looking at a significant increase in numbers if we go any time. So that would be my concern.
So my thought about the any time is that certainly the most impactful time for students is arrival and departure. But as I said, I live right across the street from a high school, and the departure isn't 2:30. It's from 2:30 to 6:30 because of all the different activities. And so I see when I come home, it's 6 o'clock in the evening. I see students getting ready to cross Great Seneca Highway, and so I think that arrival time is something that's more specific. Departure time is all across the board. But more important than that, if we're looking at, if the issue is there an infrastructure issue that might be contributing to a collision, it really doesn't matter when that happens. The possibility exists that it could happen to a student or anyone. It's not as if the infrastructure changes depending on the time.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to Councilmember Balcom. I liked your who, when, where, and just to respond on any time, I agree as well. And for me, lots of times it's actually after that the formal dismissal, because that's when we don't have crossing guards available. So it's after school programs or evening programs where families are going to them or students are going to them when we actually don't have the crossing guards, that if there are issues of safety, that might be of concern. In addition, our schools are used for as community centers for many times, and so we want to make sure that they're safe for people traveling to and from schools at all different times. So I'd have a concern about limiting it only to arrival and dismissal. And we do have, especially at the middle school and elementary school level, a number of programs that begin early as well.
I would just say that those infrastructure issues are going to remain consistent, like you said. So it's a review process. So whether it's during dismissal and departure, we're going to get those same infrastructure issues that we would get at 2:30 in the morning. That has absolutely nothing to do with school, but because it's in a school zone, now we're going to be doing a review. So that's my concern. Those numbers are going to go up, and there's a lot that's put into those reviews.
Well, so I'm certainly in agreement. I think we're all in agreement, and it sounds like the administration's in agreement too, about broadening from just school students to everybody. And I hear your point about incidents that might occur at off hours. I don't know how we get around that, right? How much harder is it? Well, let me phrase it this way. If students are starting to go to school between let's just say 6 a.m. for early birds, and then go to 7 p.m. for those who are leaving practice of any kind, the off hours not encompassed in that, what is the additional burden to tracking that data and responding accordingly? Because those are the hours that you're referring to.
Yeah, and I think, Wade, I saw numbers in your packet of the change in numbers, so.
Yeah, I'd have to go quick look that up, but it does increase. It's just a question of, again, everything's a scope, right? Every time we do something new, add something new, it takes away from what we're already doing. So it's a question of, what's the best use of our staff time, what's the best use of our ability to do that. And I think one thing to clarify when we talk about the infrastructure reviews or any sort of crash review, we take every single crash that gets inputted into the ACRES database, which is our statewide collision database, and we use all of that information to process and prioritize our projects. So even if we're not doing a full deep dive into every crash, because there's about 11,000 a year, we use all of that data together to compile and prioritize our projects that way.
I'll say again that the reason the legislation was originally crafted was to make sure that it has the most impact, right? And that we are providing help with the resources that we have. If we have to add more resources, that is a tangential conversation. And we are in the middle. We're just beginning the FY24 budget, and this will be part of that conversation. But I hear you, and I just want to be mindful that as we work to protect individuals in the school zones, it is not detracting from protecting folks in other areas as well.
So to muddy the waters or compound the issue, I do want to have a discussion about bus stops and the walk shed. I don't know
We'll
if
get to that
that's
in a
okay.
second.
So, Director Conklin, can you just expound on the coordination with the state entities in terms of, and I know that these are for fatalities and serious collisions. How would you define the serious collision, and how can we make sure that in a school zone with so many schools on state highways that we have some assurance that these are being reviewed? And can you combine that with your review of the safe routes to schools? Because clearly you're looking at state highways in that arena.
Yeah, in the Safe Routes to Schools work, they're identifying issues on the state highways that may need to be addressed. The implementation of those recommendations may or may not be done by the county, typically not. Typically the state maintains its own infrastructure. So we would provide those recommendations to them for things that we identify that need to be changed in their infrastructure. They may or may not agree with those recommendations, or may or may not follow through on that implementation. That's their discretion as the authority for the road. For the crash reviews, when and I'm probably not the best person to answer it because I don't do the crash response, but they identify the level, the seriousness of the collision, whether there's minor damage, major damage, minor injury, serious injury, fatality. And the documentation in response to that is in the crash database information, and that gears the level of response that you have in looking at the circumstances of that crash. If there was a minor fender bender, sometimes it's not even reported, sometimes it's reported as property damage only, and there's not a lot of detail into what happened. If there's a serious injury or fatality, those get the most scrutiny. In terms of what's called for in this bill in responding to pedestrian crashes on state highways, regardless of the severity, what we would do is keep a log of those crashes, what the county determined might be county responsibilities, and how they were referred and whether they were addressed by the other agencies. I think we could make that information available so that we could see whether that was having an impact on the accountability to respond. You know, let's say in January we had, I don't want to use the wrong scale of numbers, but 15 collisions in the month of January. 6 of them were on county facilities, so the county did the entire follow-up. The other 5 were on municipal or state facilities. We could say we've referred 2 to the various entities, the cities, 3 to the State Highway Administration, and then follow up in the next month of report and say those were closed out or they remain open, and keep that information available to understand whether this program was being effective in generating follow-up on those collisions.
And Councilmember Balcom, excuse me, and maybe some of the details that I'm about to share are a little bit convoluted, so pardon me for that, but if I'm not mistaken, there was a recent law that was passed that obligates MDOT SHA to conduct studies when there are serious injuries and fatal crashes on their own network, and then publicize the improvement data that they come out with. So one of the questions that you asked was, how can we be assured that these serious injury or fatal crashes are being investigated and captured on the M.SHA side? And they're now obligated to do that. So I just wanted to bring that and refresh everybody with that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Taylor. I think the issue is the any collision versus a serious or fatal collision, because I'm not going to read your mind, but the idea of the purpose of the bill, the initial purpose of the bill, is to prevent serious and fatal collisions. So I think that, and I don't know where my colleagues stand on the state issue, but I feel like we need to have some, whether it's in this bill or through your work, Director Conklin, that we have a better understanding of what's happening with any collision in any school zone.
Well, I think what I'm suggesting is you could codify this procedure as part of your bill, such that we would be obligated to report on our referrals of these issues and whether or not they're closed out. So it's not a procedure we're using, but it's a requirement, and it can be part of the other reporting you've called for in the bill.
Thank you.
You are clairvoyant, so I will give you that much. Did you have a comment?
Yeah,
go ahead.
If we're going to close this out, thank you, Mr. Pella, for raising that. I think it's actually just fatalities that they have to report on the state highways. And the first report's actually coming out this weekend on that. And I think the direction we're going in is a good one. But I want to ask Director Conklin just one clarification on, when you're talking about referring this to either the municipalities or state highway, I think you said that if there were things that we could do on our county roads, as you look at this, then we would do those. So because we know so many of these roads are intersecting, and where a crash actually takes place. That's one question. And if in the safe routes to school, what we're doing now, we're providing recommendations to state highway on those analyses. I just want to clarify, like when you say refer this to a municipality or a state highway, will there be any, even if it's at the top level, recommendations that go with that? Or are we simply passing on, this happened and you should look at it? I just want to clarify where we fall.
It's not as clear in municipalities because they have more complete control of their streets. For state highways, there are issues that the county is responsible for, generally, not always, but generally sidewalk maintenance and the traffic signal maintenance and operation. Not the design of those facilities, but their condition. So we would be looking at those elements of these crashes. If there are other obvious things that jump out in that review, certainly we would flag that for the authority that has jurisdiction over that road for them to consider, but it would be up to them, I think, to do the exhaustive review. And frankly, we need to build shared accountability among all the transportation agencies. So I think it's more effective to create this platform where they can see the records of what's happening and they can note their own responsiveness to these issues. And it gives a platform for you to understand where the issues are in the Vision Zero implementation. Our partners at the state have been far more responsive in the last 3 years or so than they had been before, and I think this builds on that record of empowering them to address the issues on their facilities without us intervening in a way that's sometimes not desired or not appreciated by them.
Great, thank you for that clarification. I'm good with the direction we're moving in.
Yeah, so good conversation. Appreciate the feedback. And so just to summarize, the legislation as drafted simply says that this would cover students going to and from school. The executive has offered an amendment to have a 30 minutes before school and 30 minutes after school within that window, and we're now entertaining just making it 24/7 essentially. That's the option that we're talking about, correct? Okay, I am comfortable with that as well, recognizing that the important, yes.
Just one point, and David Onsbach at the Planning Department. A lot of that sounds great. There was a lot of discussion about changing from student or to pedestrian or to people.
Person, yeah.
So if the amendment is to change student to people as opposed to what was proposed, pedestrian.
I believe that's on the table too, right?
We would prefer not to explore vehicle-vehicle collisions. We prefer it to be focused on pedestrians and bicyclists.
And so interesting, the definition of what a person is.
There are people
right?
in the vehicles.
So in this context, I'm referring to pedestrian.
Is that it would be in the crash database, and that is also what our Vision Zero program is organized around, is that data stream, which is reliable, not 100% reliable, but it's reliable and it's systematic, so that this information is all recorded in a relatively uniform way, and we can respond to it in a uniform way. The other types of reports, you're generally not going to have enough specificity as to location or circumstance or whether it was something that was scary or something that was a collision. And to us, to keep it organized in that system that is where data is that on reported incidents was the way to manage this activity. Otherwise, we may be chasing situations that are difficult to discern, and those will likely take a lot more staff time than something where the data is coming in an organized way with locational specificity and the details that are needed to understand what we're going to go look at.
Thank you.
So I feel like we're at the same juncture where we need to have a conversation with MCPS. Is that fair? Okay, so can we put a pin on this one?
Okay. Moving on to number 2, so amendments related to leading pedestrian interval, which is LPI, and that's a traffic control device that allows a pedestrian to establish a presence in the crosswalk before vehicles are given a green indication, and has certain specification that's required by the Federal Manual on Uniform Traffic Controls. With that being said, the amendment here that was suggested by the Planning Board, and just 2 amendments here, but we're going to take one at a time. And the first one is to amend it to include the terminology, signage required, the department must erect signage that indicates no right turn on red at intersection of a county control signalized intersection. And so that's important because we talked about the distinction between state and county and what we are allowed under our jurisdiction. And so this is also fully pledged out to in the pedestrian master safety plan, as well as referring to county control signalized intersections. And so council staff is recommending for lines 69 to 72 and 76 to 80 to use to amend the section for county control signalized intersections. I don't know if there's any discussion there.
I need to step back
Sure.
in terms of the LPIs and just the technology. Is this a matter of just flipping a switch or reprogramming the time interval, or is it, or not? I'm seeing a lot of heads shaking no. And this is where I feel like without the fiscal impact note, it's really difficult to look at what we're talking about. So can you just give me just a little bit of background on the technology of making this change?
So thank you, Councilmember Balcom. I think everyone was shaking their head about the flipping of the switch, but it is about reprogramming the signal. And so when you're talking about a signal, it has a cycle length, the time it goes from green to red to yellow to green and all that. And if you're introducing an LPI or leading pedestrian interval, you're going into your signal cycle and you're carving out additional time for pedestrian movements on a leg or on multiple legs at an intersection, which changes the time usage for vehicles on the other legs. And depending on whether or not that traffic signal is talking to other signals in your corridor, it also affects how traffic signals and pedestrian timings at these other locations are impacted. So it's not as simple as flicking a switch. There are investigations to determine whether or not the change in timing length or adding the LPI will result in other potential delays at the intersection for particular movements. LPIs will most often affect right turns and left turns. And so if you have an intersection with heavy right turns or left turns and you're now delaying them and shortening the overall cycle length for those movements, there could be some negative consequences. So those are the things that are evaluated, and then what is the payoff and what's the benefit. And so then when you take a look at all those things, you determine how and when to implement those LPIs.
Thank you. And then in terms of the equipment itself, so we're not purchasing new equipment, we're changing the program of the existing equipment?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you. And then I know that in some of the testimony there was discussion about the relationship between the right on red and the LPI, and the idea that you have to do both. Or can you talk a little bit more about that? Or maybe, or maybe not. You're looking like I don't know what you're talking about.
Mr. Holland has some detail that I think he shared with the committee in the report about it being more effective, the LPI, the leading pedestrian interval, being a more effective treatment when paired with a no turn on red, but there's no requirement that they be implemented together.
Thanks. That's probably what I read.
So going one level deeper there with the changing of the intervals, is there a master control? Does someone need to physically go to each of the intersections and use a special key to change any mechanics?
So the answer for the most part is no.
Okay.
There may be times when a technician needs to go to a traffic signal cabinet and work inside of it to affect that change.
So there is a master control. Just so I understand, how would those intervals be changed? Some software? You got a lifeline behind you. Phone a friend.
And Mobile Land, the Deputy Director and former Michael Paler for 14 years. We have the ability these days to upload the entire timing program from the controller up to our traffic management center, change those timings, download it. So addition of a phase, you cannot, that is hardwired. You have to go body in controller, turning screwdriver, moving wires. But a timing change or adding the interval, we can do that by uploading and downloading the programs.
And going back to Councilmember Balcom, one of her first questions on this topic, there would be minimal to no fiscal impact for those kinds of changes?
The impacts would be in recalculating all those timings. Really, you have to take the distribution of green time around the intersection, what's called the splits. That has to be modified. The progression factors will all have to be modified because the green comes up X seconds later. So where you're, coordinating traffic flow along an arterial, you have to recalculate all the offsets. That's helpful to have new traffic data at your disposal to do that. Some of it can be done without, but what Michael and company would have to do is recalculate the variety of timings throughout the day that are in the central computer system.
So that's essentially just staff time.
I
Yeah,
just
go
had a
ahead.
quick question on the addition of county-controlled signalized intersections. And Director Conlon, I wanted to go back to before something you said just to make sure I understand. So on signals on state highway, who controls those and the signaling of those?
So Montgomery County does, like I
Right.
said, for the vast majority of those traffic signals.
So why do we need county-controlled signalized intersections? What does that cover? What aren't county-controlled, I guess? The better way
The
to
county
ask.
is in charge of the maintenance and operation of those signals, but not the design of those signals. So any change to the phasing sequence at that signal needs to be authorized by the State Highway Administration. And I think Ms. McCartney Green could probably state it best, but we don't have the ability to compel the state to implement the items that are called for in this bill, whether they're LPI or no turn on red.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you for that clarification.
Does the state allow for no turn on red on their roads?
Yes, they use criteria that are in the manual for when no turn on red is appropriate, which are items such as a sight distance restriction that would prevent you from seeing the oncoming vehicle. And there are some other provisions, again, they're in the packet in Mr. Holland's material, about the amount of pedestrian activity is one of the factors that they can consider in doing that. They don't do it on a widespread basis generally, though.
That was going to be my next question. How prevalent is it in Montgomery County?
Yeah, so if you look at like downtown Silver Spring, most of those traffic control, if not all of them at this point, have no turn on red restrictions, whether it's a county or state signal across the CBD. The state is also implementing more of these LPIs, or lead pedestrian intervals. So there's one at, I think, University and Piney Branch now. There's a couple in White Flint. So they've been deploying this as part of their toolbox. But as mentioned, it's kind of been more spot specific versus system-wide across different areas.
Thank you. That's helpful. So we are at the decision point for the LPI amendments, the county-controlled signalized intersections.
Yep.
Correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Chair Glass, can I make just a suggestion here?
Sure.
I want to thank Director Chris Coughlin, who's been doing this for years. But I just want to be clear that on the county control, I think it suggested to say county-owned signalized intersection as opposed to county-controlled.
Makes sense.
Yep, that makes sense, given the conversation we just had. Yeah.
Along with that, before we move on, just buried in that section, looking on page 7 at the top, number 3, and it says, within 1 block of a park, a rail, or bus rapid transit stations or community center frontage. And so there's this amendment here. This is not, was already introduced in the bill. In addition, I do want to note that Councilmember Friesen also recommended libraries as well, and that's missing from that. And so for the Council Committee's consideration is whether or not to expand the bill to include an LPI, not only in downtown areas and town center areas, but the within 1 block of those iterated here in this section. And also note, DC does have a specific, instead of saying 1 block, within 400 feet. And so that's something to discuss too, whether we want to narrow that to that specific footage as opposed to saying just 1 block. I'm from New York, and 1 block means different than being here, so just want to note that.
I would endorse that change from block, which is a nebulous concept, to a specific distance. 400 feet, 500 feet, 300 feet, whatever feels right is fine. The only issue that I would take with the expansion is in terms of park, in that parks can be large areas that may or may not be generating significant pedestrian travel. So if it's a park access point, that might be a more precise way to deal with that, so that we're not doing a leading pedestrian interval in the middle of the forest.
I think that's an interesting point, especially given some of the beautiful large parks in District 2. Yeah, Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. Director Coughlin, if we moved from 1 block, also from New York, so it could be long, to something on feet, one of the things that I'm trying to think of is like, where do we want to say we're measuring from? And what comes to my mind is the community center on Piney Branch, the Long Branch Community Center, where the entrance is pretty far, in versus like where the parking lot is, and given that's on Piney Branch, right near University, I just to kind of clarify, like, where would we be?
It's a few hundred feet to get to the entrance,
right?
Right.
So.
I think that's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer. Every circumstance
Yeah.
is a little different. So,
This is Eli Glacier from the Planning Department. I think the logic that we sort of put forward when we were talking about 1 block is the idea that the built form in Montgomery County really varies across the county, and the idea that 200, like a New York block, like we don't have a lot of New York City blocks here, so the idea that it should really be up to the next intersection around the frontage. The block is like a flexible term that really adapts to the different contexts in the county.
Yeah,
so
that's kind of what I was.
So I think it would be difficult to to say 600 feet or 750 feet, because in some parts that could be multiple blocks, and in other parts that wouldn't even get you to the immediate intersection. So that's what we were thinking.
I will add, east-west highway between Colesville and Georgia is almost one full block on the north side. But now go ahead.
And in the Up County, we don't have blocks, so it's a whole nother discussion.
So, the point here, we all understand it, is to make access to all of these places safer. So while we've clearly identified problems to being too specific, how can it be worded so that the executive agencies clearly get the intent and clearly work towards making these locations safer?
It could be in the next thing you're going to talk about if there's a little bit of an expansion of the impaired public safety standard for an exemption. I don't know how you're going to feel about exemptions, but it could be excessive distance. There could be some other language that makes that a rational reason to accept something from this requirement.
Okay. And clearly, because we've already signaled we'll have another work session,
Yeah.
we can
Happy to
ruminate
look
on
it
this.
over and bring something back for the committee and for the
Yeah.
executive branch to take a look
Whether
at.
it's access to these right? Just, okay.
So looking at B, amend the language to require the county executive to provide a plan within a certain time frame to implement no right turn on red or leading pedestrian intervals. And if you look at specifically the amendment on page, I think it's 23 and 27, the executive actually has the language that was actually strike out. And so what this would do, or at least in my interpretation, is that instead of having a directive where right now, as introduced, there's a no right turn on red that DOT must install downtown and town areas, and the LPIs are also required to be installed as we specified in those areas. This changes this from a plan where the DOT would come back to the council and provide a report, and I'm going to let DOT expand on that, but from my interpretation, to review the areas where treatments are most necessary and would be most needed. And that would give more of a second hand for the committee to look at that report first before moving forward with installing the no right turns on red and the LPIs. And so that changes a little bit the gist of the direction of the bill. And just wanted to make sure that the committee understands the two different perspectives and have that open for discussion.
You want to explain?
It's well summarized. I mean, the idea behind that recommendation was to take a systematic approach at look at the locations with the assumption that they would have no turn on red and leading pedestrian intervals, to go through the steps that Mr. Paler described about what are the needs to implement that. You would have a better idea of the fiscal impact from having done that work, and we would be identifying the locations where we would be looking to exempt a location from the requirement, if there are any, because of something that we found related to them. It was a different approach to trying to get to the same objective as the exemption, which would kind of do that in a rolling basis as we were going to install this at different locations. So there were alternatives. This was our thought that, and I give Mr. Holland credit for this actually, as doing this, with the foresight and a plan to implement it rather than jumping in and implementing it and discovering reasons that we were having problems with it. So that's really the difference between those two elements, but they're trying to get to the same point.
So that's helpful. So the concern I have on its face at this point is that the legislation is state has a start date of July 1st, 2025, and that is to coordinate with the District of Columbia and to make sure that we as a region take these steps together, recognizing that Eastern Avenue and Western Avenue aren't much of a boundary. By adding 270 days, my concern is that is 270 days beyond that July 1st start date. So that is effectively, another 2/3 of a year beyond.
I don't think we appreciated that start date and coordination desire when writing this. So it
say
could
that
be
a
that
different
that's
way.
done before.
That you'd have the work ready, or the expectation would be that there's a 2-year window to gear up and have something ready?
Yeah, I mean, because this is a new initiative, so we would need to be able to scope it, figure out what it's going to cost, and also how would we phase it in year after year? What are the priority zones? Do you start in Silver Spring, Bethesda, Wheaton, then work your way north? Is there places in Germantown you'd want to start? Those kinds of things. Assuming that we couldn't do this all at like one, like I said, there's no switch and then say they're installed. Great, we're done. Because as Mr. Paler mentioned, you have to go in systematically retiming every single light along the corridor. We want to have a plan put together to say, we agree that these things should be installed. These should be treatments we're using across our network. But here's when we plan to do them and what's going to cost us to do that implementation.
And I will fully acknowledge the 270 days was not keyed to your start date of 2025. It was thinking that's the amount of time at a minimum we would need to do the preparation work.
Sure. So in light of this discussion, recognizing that there is a lead time, is there still need for that change, that recommendation?
I don't think there's a need for the interval of 270 days, but the activity is still a worthwhile activity.
I appreciate that. I accept that. Okay.
No.
So I've gone back and forth on this issue just in my own mind and with staff talking about this. I think that it's important for MCDOT to have the opportunity to look at this and look at which intersections, looking at priorities, looking at how and when this would occur. Because it is a massive undertaking. I just don't know if how we codify the plan and does the plan come back to us and how does that work? And I think it's interesting if we have the plan, we don't need the exemption. The exemption was a little squishy to me, so perhaps the plan is the right way to go. However, how do we have input on what you come up with?
Thank you, Councilmember Balcom. I was going to say this before, and maybe Mr. Holland, you could react to this, because it seems to me, given the data you've given us and that you're collecting in your work, and the fact that this is already focused on prioritizing town centers and central business districts, and we know the areas that have the most collisions already, and we're collecting that. We already have our work on equity emphasis areas. So I'm thinking, Councilmember Balcom, there are criteria, right, in which we could maybe. That's where, at that level, that's where the council has some input in terms of saying, as we move forward in prioritization, these are Council President Glass has already started with this legislation to prioritize certain areas, and then it's perhaps looking then next at where those overlap with equity emphasis areas, to just give broad categories to a plan.
Yeah, again, so last year we approved legislation creating 7 different categories. Is that 7 different categories within the county? And so in an effort to make some advancements, again, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, these were very targeted to help and move our Vision Zero forward, Vision Zero goals forward. And the broader the scope, the less likely the impact. And so I'm comfortable with that. I don't know if you got an answer to your question. I would suggest, or I would simply say, that our oversight is the input. And by when we pass this legislation, the department and the executive branch and planning and MCPD know what our intention is, and it is our responsibility to hold them to task to make sure that these improvements are being made, and then we'll come back, look at the data, and see what needs to happen thereafter.
Yeah, I guess because this is a new program, and this is certainly the first time that I've looked at it, so I don't know if the plan's going to come back. I have an expectation that 90-some% of the signalization will be in the plan. What happens if the plan comes back and there's 30% of the signalizations come back? So I think that's once the legislation is signed, we're done from that perspective, unless we come back and amend the legislation. So that's just what I'm thinking of what kind of controls or mechanism do we have to say, can you rethink that?
I can give you this now. I mean, we understand the intent that you're expressing with this legislation, which is to implement these measures on a broad and systematic basis, meaning a high degree of implementation of the areas called for in here, if not 100%. Probably not 100%, but if not 100%, because you're saying 100% in your intent. And I think you answered your own question. If we give you a bogus plan that is not consistent with your intent, you can mandate it. And then we'll have problems of exceptions if there are places that it's truly a hindrance to safety. But so be it. That's your authority as the county council.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then what would this amendment be, and how would this be codified?
And so this would be in lieu of the directive right now. And so looking specifically at lines 69 to 78, that would be removed. It would no longer be a directive by the council. It would be a plan. And that's, can easily put that in, Councilmember Balcom, where the county executive would be required to provide a plan that includes the recommendations for no right turn on red or installation or implementation of LPIs. And so it's a different approach. If the council, the committee decides to keep how it was introduced, council staff would recommend that there are exemptions that are provided in case DOT is unable to install LPI or no right turn on red, and that there is an annual reporting where the council as a whole could, or the committee could have the opportunity to hear some of the challenges, if there are, that presents itself, and things change, right, in terms of looking at that on an annual basis. So it's two approach. One, just requiring a plan that would remove the directive, those lines 69 to 78, and giving the executive branch a chance to come back to the council to say what they recommend and look at the fiscal impact from that statement, or to proceed as introduced, but also add, looking at number 3, those amendments that would require an option to be exempt or waiver from some of those requirements and the annual reporting every year.
Yeah, go ahead.
We talked a bit about the LPIs, but I just want to, on the no turn on red. So we talked about how you would go about that. The no turn on red doesn't seem to me, a layperson, as to be as complicated to put in place. So should we be treating the no turn on red and the LPIs differently? The last conversation was kind of putting them both together.
I would advise you, yes, you should treat them the same way. And the reason for that is no turn on red in some instances can make pedestrian crossing far more difficult when the pedestrian has the right of way. In Councilmember Balcomb's district is the place where we've had the most recent experience with this, at the intersection of Middlebrook Road and Germantown Road 118. There had been a horrible fatal collision of a Seneca Valley student at that location. No turn on red was implemented after that collision. It created such a hostile environment between people crossing the street when they have the right of way and pent up right turning traffic that it actually made the situation worse and was removed. So there are circumstances where the patterns of usage are just not conducive with that right turn on red. If we have a very heavy crossing, pedestrian crossing that is going with the green when the cars are able to turn, and very limited crossing where the no turn on red keeps that friction from happening, that's a circumstance where it may not be in the public interest to implement that right turn on red. It's not going to be terribly common, just like leading pedestrian interval not working isn't going to be terribly common, but it is something that I think we want to take a look at in those locations where we think it might become problematic.
I think there are probably also some other opportunities beyond just no turn on red versus sort of allowing turn on red, to look at other signalization like a right turn signal, a dedicated right turn signal, to separate that conflict. And I also just wanted to, we ran, in writing our staff report for the planning board, we looked at I guess the percentage of total signalized intersections within the downtowns and town centers that would be what we're calling county operated, I guess, under the current legislation. And it's about 110 out of 260, so about 40%. And I don't actually know how many of those already have leading pedestrian interval and no turn on red. So the actual number of intersections in sort of the main piece of the legislation is not a tremendously large number of intersections.
So,
No, yeah, I was just going to say that's really helpful. Thank you.
so I now have three things that I want to bring up. Let me start with the planning board, actually. So you're taking up the pedestrian master plan right now. What is the timetable on that?
So we had a public hearing for the pedestrian master plan on March 23rd. The work sessions will start on April 13th and continue through May. We anticipate transmitting the plan to the board, to council as the planning board draft in June of this year.
Okay, and so working under our budgetary constraints, another work session probably would not happen much before that time anyway, and so perhaps we have a larger session, not solely devoted to one or the other, but talking about pedestrians, looking at the master plan, seeing how it interplays with this legislation, having MCPS at the table, and talking about it in a comprehensive fashion. And just throw that idea out there, and we'll see what your timetable actually is. Going back to the amendment that's kind of before us, it seems to me that this is an opt-in or opt-out question. I would prefer to opt out and to mandate it, and then we can have a conversation about what's not workable, rather than provide a blank slate and have you share with us what you think is workable.
To be fair, I wrote language nearly identical to the planning board's recommendations is my amendment, and Mr. Holland came up with the other plan, which had appeal in being a more organized approach from our perspective. But I think either of these approaches is workable.
What you're asking for is flexibility and understanding, and I think you'll get that, but I think in terms of having legislation and having a law, it's a directive.
Yeah, and if you look at the way the DC Council put their bill, similar to this, but no turn on red, that's very similar. It was a opt-out clause, so that's kind of the roadmap you can use.
So I think we're, well, one last thing. The third of three points I want to raise, and it's regarding the Germantown situation at the high school. Underlying all of this and all of the millions of dollars in infrastructure that we are building to keep people safe on our roads, road rage is its own beast. And there will be people who are upset that they have to wait a second or three. There are people who will be upset that they cannot turn right on red in certain areas. But the reality is there are too many people being injured and killed on our roads, and the status quo is unacceptable. And so we will get emails. When you come back and share with us what's workable, what's not workable, there will be people who don't want anything changed. It's inevitable. But we need to change. So.
Great. I just wanted to agree with the Chair Glass on, I think I like the opt-out and putting in the exemption language. And when this comes back, one point is, and I don't think this is the intent at all given the conversation we've had today, is to make clear in the exemption, it's not to say that nothing will be done. Like that you're saying, like that the right turn on, the no right turn on red, or the LPIs aren't working, so therefore there's not anything we're going to do here. But that there would be something else, maybe another option, as we talked about, a dedicated turn signal. And again, I don't think that was the intent, but I think maybe since we are going to have another work session on this, clarifying that language.
So, yeah, I would just say that these are two of the tools in the toolbox that we are already using at locations. The effect of this law is mandating use of these under these circumstances, but all of the other options are still available to us in addition or instead of these if for some reason these don't work.
Just briefly, I wanted to clarify, 2 different deaths, 2 different high schools, both on state roads in Germantown.
Thank you. So are you clear on our
I am clear on
consensus?
that.
Okay, thank you.
I do want to note for the annual report, does the committee still want to include reporting made to municipalities and state highways for any referrals that are made as well?
Restate that?
Sure. And so the annual report right now includes rationale or evaluation for any intersection where the Director of Department of Transportation determines that there should be no installation of a no right turn on red or an LPI. What I've also took note of is that the committee said earlier in the discussion that the DOT makes referrals for collisions that happen in a municipality or on a state road. Do we want the annual report, does the committee want to have the annual report to reflect the referrals made by DOT to those
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely, because we recognize that municipalities in the state have their own processes and have to make their own remedies, but we need to use this to push them. And while we are taking action, if they are not, residents need to know. And I think that is a good tool for sharing that with residents who would have concern or frustration.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll include that in the amendment for the next follow-up work section.
Okay.
All right, page 8, number 4, amendments to automated enforcement plan. And this is really just a compliance with state law issue. And so state law authorized county to use automated monitoring systems. And so that's the traffic control system, monitoring system, the speed systems, and the school bus monitoring systems. However, stop sign monitoring systems have not been authorized by state law. There was legislation that failed to pass this session. And so the recommendation here is really a clarifying language, looking at amending lines 84 to 85. That really says if camera use is authorized by state and local law, then the plan should have state the goals, the strategies to increase that automated enforcement. And so that's a clarifying language. So right now the report would include automated enforcement at red traffic lights and speed monitoring device. I'm assuming that the plan would also note that not authorized for stop signs, but it's doing it this way just to preserve the opportunity that if future legislation is passed, we don't have to go back and amend the provision again.
Bus lane enforcement is also something we would like to have in this mix in the longer run, but currently not authorized.
And so rather than being restrictive in what is already allowed by the state, is there a way to word it so that it is open for future state legislation so that we don't have to amend it?
I can take that into consideration. Yes.
We have, in our edits, we have some recommendations along those lines that also identifies additional capabilities that would be desirable and any actions that to get that ability put in place at the state level.
Mr. Nolan, did you?
No, it's to make the same point that Chris, we had basically tried to not enumerate the different technologies because the technology list is growing.
Yeah.
We hope it will be growing in the next sessions. It was not a great session for automated enforcement this year in Annapolis, but we're looking at like vehicle exhaust monitoring systems, potentially stop sign monitoring systems, bus lane monitoring systems. So instead of having to go in and change the language, you can just say, hey, the county council's approved this. Let us know what you're doing with this automated technology.
Yeah, I think that's a preferred way to go, and I'll just share with you that I had a conversation at the start of session with a member of the General Assembly and said, I hope that you pass some expansion of automated traffic enforcement. And the individual expressed reservation with allowing and expanding the technology. And I said, well, it's really needed for Vision Zero. And the person said, oh, I love Vision Zero. I was like, well, then you need to pass this legislation, and clearly it didn't pass. So I think we have some work we have to do with our colleagues in Annapolis.
So council staff notes that the recommendation to make that a little bit more broader to apply to future automated
Yeah,
cameras.
thank you.
Number 5, so additional amendments that were proposed by the executive branch, and these are just, one was including a holistic recommendation to changes to education and outreach. Council staff saw no objections to that, and so that would include amending the contents of the traffic infrastructure review. And so that would amend lines 26 to 27, and so number 2 would include appropriate corrective actions and crash reduction countermeasures, including a redesign of the roadwork network and changes to safety-related outreach that are consistent with the U.S. Department of Transportation and the County Vision Zero program. I'm going to ask Sergeant Conklin to just expand on that.
Well, as we talked about earlier, there are a number of causal factors for crashes. Some are behavioral, some are circumstantial, some are infrastructure. We just want to have all of those factors in the toolkit, and if part of the recommendation is around using existing crosswalks more safely and effectively, both for the drivers and the students coming and going from school, we want that to be part of it. It's not just a change to the infrastructure, but also advocating for change in how that infrastructure is used.
So I think this, I understand the purpose of the amendment. I think it augments slightly the purpose of the bill. The bill is largely on infrastructure and technology, and now it's going into public education. So what would the implementation there be, and what would it take away, if anything, from the other aspects?
Right. So our Safe Routes to Schools program, we kind of have two houses. We have the infrastructure that's done by the engineer and the tech, and then we have an outreach coordinator for Safe Routes to Schools. So it'd be saying that we have a holistic program running right now for Safe Routes to Schools. So let's say, the police find, we find in these crashes that parents are texting while they're dropping their kids off. We can't engineer except for maybe slapping phones out of people's hands. But we probably should do that with government officials. So that'd be more something on the education enforcement side to make sure that if there's something around distraction or device use, that would be something that not actually is an infrastructure fix. It's a fix that's something more on the behavioral, building a culture of safety side.
And are these resources that the United States Department of Transportation provides, or is it already in some other line item? Or
Yeah, so there's, on the behavioral side, it's the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration puts out the countermeasures that work, and that's more on the enforcement education side.
okay.
So what do we currently do now if you review an accident, a collision, and it calls for some behavioral measure? What currently happens?
Thank you, Councilmember Balcom. We have dedicated staff that conduct regular outreach activities with the local elementary, middle schools, high schools, in the form of in-person training, walk to school days, appointing high school students to be safety officials to talk about some of the safety initiatives that can be implemented. So right now we have a holistic approach in looking at the schools and students and trying to teach them how to be safe on the network. And we also expand that to outreach to malls, at malls or at supermarkets, especially when we have new devices that we've incorporated or implemented on the network. And we go to those particular neighborhoods and we say, hey, there's a new device. This is how you use it. And we hand out information. We talk to them about the usage of it. So we're doing that now, and having this, having it carry over into this particular bill would be appropriate, I think.
The main difference here is that there's not currently a linkage between looking at a collision and implementing the program. The program is implemented independent of that connection, so this would create a connection in the program that we can do anyway, but it's not currently done that way.
Thank you.
So I'm comfortable including this to broaden the scope of other types of public education, just so long as it doesn't come at the detriment of anything else. And I'm hearing that it's a different program.
Right, because I mean, with the infrastructure review, you may have the one-off crash, but as we build this kind of case load and the information we build from those things, that can help us inform it. Because one of the things we do with the same crash data we used for the infrastructure and prioritization process, We also use that to try and build our education, outreach, and enforcement programs as well, to make sure they're all using the same data and trying to counteract the things we're seeing on our road with all the tools in the toolbox.
Yeah, I guess I just want to underscore it's all good, right? We need to be doing this, but want to make sure that this bill, and the point of it was to really look at our infrastructure and making sure the emphasis is kept there. And so I don't know, if it may be just a wording issue, but I just want to make sure that the intent in what we're trying to do here is really looking at our infrastructure, and that's where the emphasis lies. Education's all good, but I really want to make sure we're staying focused on that.
I guess in the amendment, the last two words, if warranted, or where this really comes down.
Mm-hmm.
So it leaves open the opportunity to engage in that holistic fashion as is noted in the packet, if warranted.
Mm-hmm.
So with
I mean, my view is that I don't oppose it. I just don't know if it's necessary, because if education, community outreach is a countermeasure that you think is necessary, then it would be appropriate corrective actions and crash reduction countermeasures. So
I think we're all in agreement that it is worthy, but should it be in this piece of legislation?
Yeah, and it's also, I think it's maybe maybe we just need to look at it again. I think it might be,
We'll have another work session.
emphasis in whether or not it needs to be.
Okay.
Lastly, for the committee to consider, still on page 9, just looking at 5Bs, whether to amend the language that refers to the 6-month clock starts upon notification of the crash to the Department of Transportation by the relevant law enforcement agency. And so that's amending lines 29 to 30. And that just triggers when that review should be conducted after the notification.
I think that makes sense.
And I think clarifying, Director Conklin, that that's the only way that you formally are aware
That's
of
correct.
that, right? And the time frame between when a crash occurs and when you're notified, roughly?
If it's a fatal collision or a potentially fatal collision, it's a very short period of time. I don't know, Wade, you may know better how quickly the data shows up in the database.
Yeah, I mean, typically a report, so we don't see a report that the database has been approved. So that's usually can be between 1 and 3 days, depending on the crash and crash severity. The language, matches the same language that's in the state law that they adopted, so making it similar to that. But also make sure when we do our end of the year audit, maybe we catch something that we didn't catch, when that crash occurred, but we still wanted to go back and look at that crash so that we still have that time available to research that if there was one that was omitted for whatever reason.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think we're good with that. And we will come back to talk through the safe routes to schools and the MCPS aspect, and with MCPS at the table. And then in June, we will revisit this conversation in a larger scope with the pedestrian master plan by the planning department. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will continue to monitor